Hey, Ben.
Hello.
Hello, everyone.
Hey, Leslie.
Hi.
Hey, everyone. Hey, Michelle.
Hello. Happy Monday. It looks like we're a small group so far.
We'll give everyone a minute to join.
Sounds good.
Michelle, hi there. It's Leslie.
Hey, Leslie.
Hey there. Let's try to catch up soon.
Yeah, that sounds great. I can send you an email and we'll set
Okay.
something up.
Yeah, let's do that.
I think I have an email I need to send to Nancy with the same thing. So it's just catching up all over.
Yeah.
Nancy, you're on mute if you were saying something.
I just said thank you.
Okay, everyone, we can go ahead and get started for the sake of time. I'm Annika Lefebvre. I'm the Food Systems Resilience Coordinator with the Maryland Department of Emergency Management. And this is the Communication and Coordination Committee for the Maryland Food System Resiliency Council. I am going to run through roll call after turning it over to Heather and Michelle to say hello.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Heather Bruskin and have the honor of being the co-chair of this committee with Michelle Caruso. So delighted to have Michelle back. And in a day-to-day basis, my primary role is the director of the Montgomery County Office of Food Systems Resilience. And I will turn it over to Michelle, who's being very appropriately celebrated with emojis and in the chat box. So yay, Michelle.
For anyone that's new to this call, they're going to be so confused. So hi, everyone, Michelle Caruso, and I have been a member of this committee for the last several years and co-chair, but I am rejoining under a new affiliation, which is that I'm the volunteer chair of the Frederick County Food Council, which is actually where I live in Frederick County. And so I'm happy to be here in this new capacity and, excited to see so many familiar faces and, navigate this tough landscape that we're all dealing with on a day-to-day basis. So it's nice to be in this community to help problem solve and understand, what's going on at the state level. It's a fast and furious time, that's for sure.
Thanks, Michelle, and welcome back. And I'm just going to run through our roll call really quick of the voting members. So bear with me, it won't take too long. We have Heather and Michelle here. Do we have Senator Hester? LaMonica Jones? Dr. Stephanie Lansing? Dave McHenry? Nancy Nunn, I know, is here. Dr. Range? And Diana Taylor. Okay.
I'm here.
Hey, Diana. Thank you. All right. So we just announced that Michelle is back, so I'll skip that. The next Communication and Coordination Committee meeting will be next Monday, March 10th from 1 to 2 p.m. Environment and Production is meeting March 13th, and Distribution and Access on March 27th. The full FSRC is going to meet April 17th to have a legislative debrief following the session, but there will also be a debrief call within the Communication and Coordination Committee, so stay tuned for that. And with that, I think we're ready to just turn it over to Ben to help us talk through legislative updates.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to just share my slides. So we have a couple of pieces of legislation to go through, and then I'm going to leave a good deal of time to talk about the budget and the Budget Reconciliation and Financing Act, because I know that's on everybody's mind. It's where a lot of stress and unease is these days. A reminder of our tracking resources, linked to our legislative tracking sheet here, updated daily, as well as our committee hearing calendar. And I wanted to highlight some dates. So today is the last day for the introduction of bills without requiring suspension of the rules, which means really everything that was going to be introduced has been introduced, unless there's some type of emergency. For example, last year we had the bridge collapse that happened in late March, and they pushed some bills through there. Opposite chamber crossover date, that's a big one. That is 2 weeks from today. So generally, a bill, if it wants to make it all the way through the legislative process, has to be passed out of its original chamber by crossover date. So we should have a good idea 2 weeks from tonight which bills are making their way through the General Assembly and which bills are stalled for this session. So we'll have a lot more information on the disposition of the bills that we've covered once we've reached that crossover date. And we are only about a little more than a month away from Sine Die, 11:59 p.m. on April 7th. All right, just a couple of bills to go over today. The first one relates to blue catfish population control. So this bill would provide that for catching blue catfish, DNR shall establish a pilot program authorizing electrofishing, the use of finfish trot lines up to 2,400 feet in length, and would authorize the use of hooks that are not corrodable. And it notes that the department's regulations cannot set a limit on the number of hooks used for this type of fishing. The president of the Maryland Watermen's Association testified in support of this bill. It had a hearing in the House. Hearing in the Senate is tomorrow. This is an emergency bill, meaning it would go into effect immediately upon its enactment. And so there are slightly different rules for emergency bills in the General Assembly. So I'll stop there and see if anybody has questions on this blue catfish bill. Annika.
Ben, can you say more about the emergency bill, like how that is determined and what qualifies it as an emergency bill?
Sure. So it qualifies as an emergency bill if it is drafted as an emergency bill. There are two differences there. The first is that for all other bills, they have an effective date. It's usually July 1st or October 1st of that calendar year. Emergency bills go into effect immediately. And then a 2/3 majority is required in each house of the General Assembly in order to pass an emergency bill, where simple majorities are required for most bills. Ends up not really mattering that much in practice. Yeah, Michelle?
I have a question for when you're done answering Annika's question. Sorry.
Sure. So it ends up not mattering that much. Democrats have a 2/3 majority in the legislature. So if they're the ones pushing the emergency bill, it tends to pass. And if it's a bipartisan bill, it also tends to pass. But yes, those are the rules for emergency bills. Michelle.
I don't know if I'm not someone who is an experienced waterman or, has a lot of experience with fishing industries. And I'm not sure if anyone's here to answer this question, but how do these specific, ways of fishing, the electrofishing, for example, how do they specifically target the blue catfish? Is there like concern with unintended consequences to the rest of the marine population?
Steve, can you answer?
You want me to field that?
But-
Yeah, DNR heavily regulates all this. They always worry about bycatch and unintended consequences of using various gears. So the industry is very heavily regulated by DNR.
And Michelle, Virginia already has this in place. And it really is the answer, part of the answer, trying to get the population under control. And it usually stuns them and doesn't usually kill them. I think
Got
I'm right
it.
on that one, Steve.
That's correct. It usually stuns, not kills.
Mm-hmm.
Great, thank you. I really appreciate the extra context as someone who doesn't understand these practices very well. So thank you.
I'd like to make one very small correction. It's actually a 3/5 majority to pass an emergency bill. I said 2/3. So if you're a percentage-oriented person the way I am, 60% instead of 66.67 or whatever.
Good job, Ben. I didn't want to correct you.
No, I please do, but that one's gonna stick with me for a while, Steve. Have to hang my head in shame on that one. Any other questions about blue catfish population control? All right, moving along. I apologize for.
I'm sorry, Ben. I'm going to add quickly in there. For everybody who doesn't know, is that the food banks have been using the blue catfish for distribution. So again, part of the food resiliency plan should be the blue catfish. I'll get off my soapbox on blue catfish now.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I know, having been doing this a couple of years now, how much of a win-win it is when we have an overpopulation of fish. It helps to relieve food insecurity. I don't eat fish, but apparently they're delicious and full of protein. So good stuff. All right. The last bill we'll review today has to do with cottage food products. So the current definition of what can be sold under our regulatory regime for cottage food products is any food that is non-hazardous. That is being replaced in this bill with non-potentially hazardous, and I'll explain what that means. But basically, it's expanding the definition of cottage food products to include refrigerated baked goods. So things like cheesecake, custard, meringues. They mentioned refrigerated non-meat pie. That would be allowed to be sold under our current cottage food regulatory regime. We had a hearing in the House on this bill, presented by the Senate sponsor, Senator Reedy. I think it was actually a hearing in the Senate. We had a bunch of people who sell cottage food for a living testifying and saying it's a real problem because people want to sell baked goods. But for example, you wouldn't be able to put icing on the baked goods because that would require refrigeration. So it limits people's ability to sell foods in this cottage food industry. Dr. Clifford Mitchell from the Environmental Health Bureau of MDH testified in opposition. I think mainly because the bill would require semi-periodic inspections, and this would be a substantial staffing challenge. Just because when you add perishable items, it increases the need to do these periodic inspections. So I will stop there on cottage food products.
Ben, do we know if there's any type of registration or I know it's not licensing, but is there any type of revenue stream for supporting the inspections that are required?
1 second, I saw something in the fiscal note. So basically, the work MDH does now is providing unique identification numbers upon request for cottage food items, and they review food labels and proof of completion of safe food handling so that businesses can satisfy the requirements of selling these products in their stores. So currently, it takes about 20 hours per week to complete these duties. MDH in the fiscal note anticipated that the inclusion of refrigerated goods would result in more requests for these identification numbers and would not be able to be completed with existing budget resources. So they estimate that it would be a cost of about $90,000 to account for this additional regulatory work.
And I assume there's no fee that's associated with getting an identification number or anything like that to.
I do not believe so, no. It is it's no cost to the food business, to the cottage food business to get this identification number.
But it seems like there's no opposition from a food safety perspective, just from a administrative.
That's right. Although it's kind of indirectly related to food safety, because if they didn't have the resources to do the inspections, I don't think they would be okay with let's remove the inspection requirement. I think it's a combination of, well, we can't afford with current resources to undertake these inspections, and we need to have inspections if we're going to have refrigerated baked goods.
Mm-hmm. Steve, not to put you on the spot, but I'm just curious. I know there's been conversation around on-farm value-added product processing. Are the rules for on-farm products the same as current cottage food rules?
I'm not the expert in this. Mark, can you comment?
Oh, no, I can't.
And I don't think Martin's here. Martin's really steeped in this.
Well, it's certainly something that we could inquire about just to get more information, because I think there's some of this seems administrative, some of it seems just clarifying language, but the cottage food bakers, I imagine, indicated that this would be a revenue and economic opportunity for their businesses. Is that right, Ben?
Yeah, that the hearing was surprising in that regard, and that people were saying like it's literally their livelihood. Because if you're trying to sell your cottage food products to stores and you're not allowed to include refrigerated baked items, that really cuts down on your ability to sell things. A lot of delicious baked goods have things like custard and frosting and meringue, fresh fruit tarts. So they were very adamant in the committee hearing about it.
Ben, you might not eat fish, but you sound like you know a lot of refrigerated baked goods.
I would volunteer to do a taste test on these cottage food products if it would help the state of Maryland.
I mean, does anyone know if if county regulations could supersede this, or if the state law sets the precedent?
Hi, Michelle. This is Mike with Montgomery County. This is a great bureaucratic response of it depends.
Thanks, Mike.
I try to be so helpful, I know.
It's good to see you.
Likewise. Thank you, Michelle.
Well, maybe a recommendation will come in, Ben, for volunteer inspectors and taste testers.
I'm looking forward to that.
Maybe that's something we can suggest.
Last thing on the policy side here, this doesn't change in the bill, but just worth noting that all cottage food regulations only apply if you sell up to $50,000 in goods in a given year. So it would exempt, like, if somebody wanted to make cupcakes for a birthday party and that required refrigeration. Unless they're very expensive cupcakes.
Does anybody know of any agencies or organizations represented on this call that have weighed in?
Steve's right. The guru is Martin Prue. He's the man who knows all this stuff. If we want the subject matter expert, Martin's it.
All right. Well, we can continue. Thank you, Mike. We can continue to follow this, and I think, when is the hearing, Ben?
The hearing already happened, but there's no cross file on this bill,
Oh, that's what it is. Okay.
which means we should, if it's passed out of the Senate, there may be a House hearing that we could weigh in on.
Oh, so the 228 was in the Senate.
Yes, sorry, that's a typo there.
Okay, sorry.
Mhm.
Okay, great. Well, we'll continue to follow, and thanks for flagging that one, Ben.
Sure. Some upcoming hearings on legislation that we've discussed in the past. We've already had a Senate hearing on the Food Deserts Work Group. We've discussed a number of times, just flagging that the House hearing on this is tomorrow. We talked last week about tax on sugary beverage distributors, the For Our Kids Act, that has a hearing on Thursday, the 6th. Oyster Shucking House Loan Program. The House version of this bill already passed. The Senate version of this bill gets heard tomorrow. Chesapeake Bay Legacy Act already had the Senate hearing. The House hearing is on Thursday. This is the one having to do with the Maryland Leaders in Environmentally Engaged Farming, LEAF program. And then a few notes from hearings that were held last week. There weren't as many hearings as there were in previous weeks, but just a couple of notes. We had a hearing in the Senate on the CEP bill, the Community Eligibility Expansion Program bill. It was received very positively. A lot of individuals testified from a bunch of different organizations. The sponsor of the bill is the chair of the Budget and Tax Committee, which is important because I think if it weren't his bill, there would have been more questions about the fiscal note here, which is it's a $10 million fiscal note, which in other years may not be considered that much to fill this important gap, but just given where we are, there was no opposition and nobody asked about the $10 million fiscal note. House hearing, by the way, on this is on Wednesday. The Family Investment Program and Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program benefits. This is the one dealing with counting child support for the purposes of qualifying for these programs. Had a hearing in the House. A lot of advocates testified. And then I think there was one or two questions, but no organized opposition to this bill. Flagging bills that have already passed their original chamber. The only new one this week is the property tax credit for supermarkets, which I believe we covered in one of the first weeks of this session, passed unanimously in the Senate. Obviously, we'll keep watching because a lot of bills are going to move over the next 2 weeks. And then same as last week, bills that have been withdrawn, the on-farm home processing license bill and the food and milk product labeling bill. Went over our priority bills with upcoming hearings. This is just a page, and we'll send this slide deck around of other hearings that may be of interest to people that are coming up this week that are at least tangentially related to the work the FSRC does.
And so, Ben, this might be a good opportunity to remind everybody that bills with hearings on the 5th, so on Wednesday, are due by 6 p.m. today. And I think there were a number that you covered today that do still have opportunity for testimony, and those that are on the 6th would obviously be tomorrow. So if those of you who are potentially interested in submitting testimony, just keep in mind those timelines, because I think that includes the CEP bill and the sugar sweetened beverage tax bills. All right.
That's right. Thank you so much for that, Heather. And if anybody needs help or advice on how to testify, if you haven't done it before, or the whole process, let us know. We're happy to help with that. All right, moving on to what's called the BRFA, the Budget Reconciliation and Financing Act. I realize many of you who've been deep in the legislative process know all of this, but just like a 30-second overview. So you have a budget bill which lays out appropriated amounts for the next fiscal year. The Budget Reconciliation and Financing Act, which is another bill that happens yearly, generally more controversial because it seeks to reconcile previously appropriated money with desired spending levels. And since those desired spending levels, given our deficit this year and our structural deficit, is going to be lower than any of us, I think, want or wish, that means that the Budget Reconciliation and Financing Act is going to contain some cuts. So there's a lot of language, if you look through the BRFA, that says like such and such program is funded at X number of dollars through fiscal year 2029, and the 2029 is crossed out and replaced with 2025. And so that would mean that that program is being zeroed out for future years. So we had the governor's original proposal for the Budget Reconciliation and Financing Act. The governor submitted some revisions to reflect some pessimism in the fiscal outlook, given what's happening at the federal level. And then the Department of Legislative Services produced a document. I've linked it here, and I can put it in the chat just in case people want to follow along. So the Department of Legislative Services, just as a service to the legislature, lists like basically the entire universe of where they could cut ongoing spending. So they just have various recommendations and ideas of existing funds where they can transfer money into the general fund or other ways of cutting spending. So there are a few items of interest here. I'm just going to put that link in, but I also want to keep things open to discussion. So Steve, do you want to talk about the Maryland Agricultural Land Preservation Program and Rural Legacy Program and what the DLS has recommended on land preservation? Or not? Sorry, you're on mute. I can move on. Steve, I know I flagged that for us.
This is Mike. Ben, I can talk about it.
Sure.
So what this BRFA recommendation did, amongst other things, was recommending reallocating 4 fiscal years worth of preservation money from program open space and ag transfer tax. Instead of being earmarked for the preservation programs of MALF and Rural Legacy, they're going to be used for the general fund from FY26 to FY29. So that's 4 fiscal years where the state would have no funding for its premier farmland preservation programs. So that's not great amongst all the other things that are going at agricultural land across the state.
Thank you so much.
Mike, can I ask a question about that? Or Ben, did you want to move through the rest of it? And then
go ahead and ask your question, and I'll go through the next
So-
couple of things.
Yeah, so the Frederick County executive spoke about this in some remarks on Friday at a local climate summit. And I was not there, sadly, so I missed it. And I'm trying to understand a piece of context that I heard she shared, which is that this part of the reason that Project Open Space is being cut is because of anticipated cuts to the federal budget that supports this. Do you know anything? Is that true, or am I mishearing what was said?
I don't know if you misheard it or not, Michelle. I'm not sure what's happening at the federal level. Steve, I see you're off mute now.
Yeah, sorry, somehow I got lost. Yeah, in terms of what's going on at the national level, I think many of you have heard that the Congress passed a budget resolution a week ago. And in that budget resolution are $880 billion worth of cuts, which almost certainly, if adopted, would have to come from Medicaid. And the concern there is that might be at least $1 billion not coming to Maryland to support the Medicaid bill that Maryland has. So legislators are very concerned about impending reductions in funding coming to Maryland that they might be forced to make up. So not only is there a $3 billion shortfall in the FY26 budget, it may be $4 billion or some higher number. So members of the General Assemblies, particularly in the Senate, are thinking about squirreling away another $500 million just to make sure they can deal with shortfalls that may be coming. And as Mike said, the DLS recommendation that shocked the world last week, cut for 4 years, all of the easement purchase funding for MALP and DNR, including the MALP Ag Land Preservation Program, the Rural Legacy Program. It's cutting stateside POS in terms of all new land acquisition, and it's cutting half of the local government share of program open space to be used solely for park improvements and that sort of thing, not land acquisition. So that's real money, and of course, there's a lot of concern about that.
Thanks, Steve. I wasn't sure if it was directly related to some kind of federal support, but it sounds like indirectly with the cuts that are anticipated. Yeah, got it. Thank you.
And just to your point, Steve, I think that weighed on everything that they were discussing in these BRFA hearings, just the expectation that as bad as the structural or as bad as the FY 2026 deficit is, we have to be prepared for potentially additional shortfalls because of what's happening in Congress. A couple other things I wanted to flag. There's a big concern among the counties, and Maryland Association of Counties, I think their heads are going to explode. A lot of budget savings in the state budget is increasing the county share. So it's cost shifting from the state budget to county budgets for various programs. I know one of them has to do with teacher pensions, but really, if you look through this BRFA document, there are a lot of incidents in which, for example, the state currently pays 50% of a program and the counties pay 50%, and they change it to 60-40 or 70-30 in favor of the counties. And the counties are very concerned about this for a couple of reasons. Many of them are already at the highest level of income tax that they are allowed, or the highest percentage of income tax that they are able to charge under state law. So localities have, there's a cap in the percentage of the income tax that counties can levy. So that really leaves them with two options. The first is to raise property taxes, which nobody likes for obvious reasons. And then the second is significant cuts. Large portions of these county budgets are spent on public education, and there are a lot of mandates that are part of the blueprint where, in a perfect world, they might be able to make cuts to public education without hurting student performance, but they are statutorily prohibited from doing so because of the blueprint. The reason I think that's relevant to us is that just puts everything else potentially on the chopping block. So if the county has to find $50 to $100 million in either additional revenue or spending cuts, I just think there's some negative potential there. So that's why I flagged that. And then the last thing, Annika helpfully put in the chat, Maryland Matters wrote an article on some of the Department of Legislative Services ideas for closing this deficit gap for fiscal year 2026. There were a bunch of ideas. We have a 7-day sales tax holiday in August that's, I think, ostensibly for back to school supplies. One of the recommendations is to repeal that, or at least temporarily repeal it. And then another one is a snack tax. So I learned that sometime in the 1990s, the state of Maryland decided to levy a tax on snack food items that was pretty narrowly defined. You could tell it was written in the 1990s because it was like chips, popcorn, pork rinds, pretzels, chipsticks. It would be a 75-cent tax indexed to inflation. But I was talking about this with Annette, who's on the call, and with some other people. It seems weird to me because, like, you're not taxing mini muffins or ice cream or candy. Like, it's just a very, they're targeting salty snacks. So that was one of the ideas that's been proposed. I have no idea. I would doubt that that's something that the legislature wants to touch. But just thought I would throw that out there as potentially significant for the food system. And I will stop there and see if anybody has any questions on any of this stuff. Annika.
So Ben, thank you for running through this. What happens next, like based on the DLS recommendations, and where do they go from here?
Sure. So the BRFA, just like the budget, has to be passed by basically the end of this month. And so what's happening now is backroom negotiations. At each of these hearings, you have a million different people testifying, and that's only a slight exaggeration, saying, my program's great, I don't want to cut it. So it's up to the Budget and Tax Committee in the Senate and the Appropriations and Ways and Means Committee in the House to start to meet behind closed doors and make some decisions. The DLS recommendations are just those recommendations, but just given the degree of the shortfall, I think the money's going to have to come from somewhere. So we're going to just keep tracking it very closely. I don't think we have a great idea of what the final language is going to look like, but we'll certainly keep our eye on it. And I see we have a couple other hands up. Go to Search, Thomas.
Yes, good afternoon, Ben and company. Thank you for your presentation. Let me put this down here. Okay. I recently testified before the Appropriations Committee about the Southern Maryland Agricultural Development Commission's financial situation. I know that this might not necessarily be a question that anyone can answer at this time, but does anyone have any sense as to the fate of the program? Because I know in the bill, they phase out the program in increments of $250,000 over the next maybe 2 or 3 fiscal years. And they do a lot more than just help tobacco farmers convert to agriculture, regular agriculture. They also help with the money market program and other food security and food insecurity programs too. It would be a very devastating blow to the state if this is cut now, especially in light of what's going on at the federal level. Thank you very much.
I can answer that.
Oh, go ahead, Rachel.
Oh, thanks, Steve. What I can tell you is that members of the Southern Maryland delegation, so the senators and delegates, have been advocating for that funding to be restored in the budget, both with the members of the committee and with the governor's office. So it really is up to the legislature to, decide whether or not they're going to accept the cut that was in the governor's budget, or whether or not they're going to decide to go back to fully funding it and not phase it out. But I can tell you that there are several legislators working behind the scenes to try to encourage the continued funding of SMATIC. And I think that there are also some creative avenues that SMATIC can probably look at to try to figure out other funding sources. And so there are options that are being considered, given the fact that there's great value. What I will say, one of the counters is, and so if you're someone who wants to send a letter to any of the committees, B&T, Appropriations, and Ways and Means, one of the counter arguments that we've heard from some committee members is, well, SMATIC has done what it was supposed to do. We've heard the Cigarette Restitution Fund was intended to pay tobacco farmers to help them transition away from tobacco into other things. And it's been 25 years and SMATIC has achieved its goal. And so it's time for this to happen. And so what people should really highlight is, like you said, it's not just that they helped, traditional tobacco farmers transition into other agricultural industries and businesses. It's all the other added things that they have taken on throughout the years that many of those things, like mail and market money, no other entity in the state is doing. So those are the things that I would encourage people who want to testify to highlight, or not testify, because time for testimony is passed. But if you want to submit something in writing and reach out to legislators, that's what I would encourage.
Yes, I did submit written testimony, and I even did the virtual testimony here last week. I had waited forever and a day. So it's good to know that other people can also do that. But I would disagree with their contention that SMATIC has already done what it needs to do. It's a program that needs to continue going on. That's rather short-sighted thinking, but I can understand when you're fiscally under the gun, you have to make choices. Thanks.
Certainly, and we'd agree with you. But now it's just making sure that folks find a nice, polite way to express to our legislators that there's still great value in what SMATIC does.
Thank you, Rachel, and really appreciate that insight. And thank you, Serge, for engaging in the testimonial process and sharing MAFRAC's perspective.
Steve, did you have your hand raised as well?
Oh, I was going to comment on the process. If things go as normal, although we don't see this in the hearing schedule yet, the House of Delegates will deal with the budget first, beginning in the Appropriations Committee next week. So the subcommittees would report out sort of early, middle of the week, and then the full House Appropriations Committee would take up both the operating budget and the BRFA bill on Friday. If things go normally, and we don't know that because of the magnitude of the challenges that confront them. So the House will move the budget first this year, and then a week later, the Senate Budget and Tax Committee will go through the same process, but they'll be reacting to what the House of Delegates has done.
Yep, so it alternates years. So in odd years, the House goes first on operating budget and BRFA, and in even years, it's the Senate. Did I get that right, Steve? I don't want to mess it again. Okay.
Ben, I'm reading about the snack tax, and I believe that we, in the state of Maryland, soda and candy is already taxed at 6%.
Okay, so it's not subject to the general food exemption.
Right, so this just adds more to that exemption. Adds snack foods.
What about mini muffins, Michelle?
I didn't see anything about mini muffins or ice cream.
Okay.
But candy and soda.
Candy and soda. All right.
Yeah, Ben was right. Targeted to salty foods, salty snacks.
Which yeah, it just might reflect more of a 1990s understanding of what was unhealthy, and because that's when it was originally drafted. So I think like there is something in statute providing for this snack tax, but it was permanently suspended in 1996, so they could resurrect it as it already exists in Maryland code. All right, any other questions or comments on the BRFA? All right. Two things to mention with the just in terms of federal policy that if anybody has questions, or this might just be another item of discussion. We have a short-term problem, a medium-term problem, and a long-term problem. The short-term problem is that the government has to be funded. The current continuing resolution expires on March 14th. So the House and Senate are going to have to agree on something by then. It seems like the Republican approach currently is to just have a continuing resolution at current funding levels through September 30th. The question and the point of controversy is that Republicans want language in there codifying some of the Department of Government efficiency cuts, the DOGE cuts, and Democrats, conversely, are looking for language that would stop DOGE from doing some of the things that they're doing. So it's a bit of a messy process, but just something to keep your eye on. That would mean a partial government shutdown on the 14th, which is in 11 days. Medium-term problem, I know everybody knows this, but just the impact of layoffs resulting from DOGE. The state of Maryland has set up a service to help federal employees who have been laid off as part of this process, to help them in the job market and also open up state jobs. But it certainly has a big impact on our economy. I think 6% of the Maryland workforce works for the federal government, especially in some of these huge institutions like CMS and NIH. So that has downstream effects on our budget picture. And then the longer term problem that Steve was talking about, and I think is important to mention here, is this House budget resolution, which sets up a process for budget reconciliation. That would be the vehicle for potentially these large Medicaid cuts, potentially as large as $850 billion. We're a long way from that process being completed. The Senate has to pass their version of a budget resolution. Those have to be reconciled. The committees have to come back with specific cuts. But sometime in the next few months, this may or may not come up as a bill on the House and Senate floor. So if you have good advocacy methods for your members of Congress, now would be the time to deploy them.
Ben, there's another meeting coming up on March 6th that's relevant to all of this discussion. The Maryland Board of Revenue Estimates is meeting that day. And so they will come out with a pronouncement on what they expect the revenue situation to be in fiscal 2026 and in the current fiscal year. They'll be trying to digest all this federal stuff without much information, but they will come out with a number, and then the Budget and Tax Committee and House Appropriations Committee will use that number as part of the sifting out that they'll have to do in making the budget decision. So it's very relevant, although I think they're going to say they have a very difficult time to estimate how bad the federal government situation is going to be.
Right. That is big because that's their last meeting before the legislative session ends. So that's going to be the final amount that the budget and the BRFA are going to have to target. So thank you for bringing that up.
And Ben, just a follow up on the potential shutdown. I don't know if anybody from DHS is on the call, but that's something obviously even at the local level we've been watching really closely because the hope would be that federal workers would receive back pay for the time that they were furloughed. But I think there will still be core services like SNAP that will continue, but there isn't unlimited funding to operate SNAP during a shutdown. So I think in the past, there's been sufficient resources to carry through. But if anybody has any additional information on that, how wide that window is, and if there are any concerns on core program operations during a shutdown, I know that's something that we've been researching locally and would love to learn more about. And for those of you who don't already follow the Food Research and Action Center, they've been doing an excellent job of covering a lot of the nutrition program discussions at the federal level and also provide opportunities to weigh in from an individual or organizational perspective on what's happening. But that's been very helpful for just following the different conversations because, you've probably seen there's proposed $230 billion cuts to SNAP, which would look potentially like work requirements, a cap on minimum benefits, a reduction in the overall monthly benefit, as well as looking at some of the other child nutrition programs, like changing the qualification calculation for the community eligibility provision. And so I think we talked a lot about a CEP bill this season or this session, but if that number changes, then it will significantly impact at the local level how many kids are receiving universal breakfast or universal lunch. So obviously these are all things that are just under discussion right now, but I think it's always helpful just to be aware so that you can potentially be projecting what impacts might be and also informing how that's going to connect to our local communities. So thanks, Ben, for creating that space and that update for all of us. And, just building on what Steve and others have shared, there's very much a budget domino effect that's in play for every cost that is shifted from the federal government to the states, likely will result in costs shifted from the states to the local communities with difficult choices about how you either increase revenue or cut expenses. And so we'll do our best to continue sharing information as we have it, but really invite all of you to share what you're hearing and seeing as well. Was there a third bullet, Ben?
There was not. The last thing I was going to say is just, if anybody has questions they want to talk offline about the budget reconciliation process, it can be a little bit confusing, and I'm happy to talk with people through it. So, for example, the budget resolution won't specify which programs are getting cut, but it'll say the House Energy and Commerce Committee shall cut $800 billion in the next however many fiscal years. And you have to kind of read the tea leaves to realize that that's Medicaid. Same for the Agricultural Committee, which has jurisdiction over SNAP. So if anybody just has questions on the reconciliation process, I'm happy to be a resource for that. I follow that very closely. And that is the end of our update. Happy to answer any questions, and otherwise I will hand it back over to our co-chairs.
Well, I don't see any questions, but we do, we've got 10 minutes left and want to always make sure that we open up the opportunity for bills that might not have been brought up today, or updates that might not have been shared, or just issues in general that you're following through the budget and legislative sessions. So are there things we didn't talk about that you would like to connect on as a group today, or information or engagement opportunities that you'd like to share?
Sure, Heather, I
I
have
do
one.
have one.
Oh, sorry.
We got Rachel, then Serge.
Thanks. One thing, I know SB 481 is on the list of bills that were withdrawn. We did, Martin and I have conversations with MDH and with Senator Gallion, and that bill was withdrawn. I think I may have missed that meeting last week, but that bill, or the week before, the bill was withdrawn because we got a commitment from MDH that they would change their regulations to incorporate the conditions that are in the bill and to remove, so they'll amend it slightly. We were talking amendments initially to the bill, but they're going to remove the meat and cheese from that cap, from the on-farm processing license, and increase the cap to 50,000 annual revenue instead of 40,000. So I did want to share that.
Yeah, thank you, Rachel. And Martin had hopped on last week to share a bit of information, but that is helpful additional context. And so it seems like there's a path forward that is working for all parties.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you, Rachel.
You're welcome.
Serge?
Yes. This might be a bill that some of you may or may not be familiar with, but I would presume that you all are. Any status on what happened to Senate Bill 232, which would have basically done reforms to the SNAP reimbursement? I know that it was withdrawn per the request of the State Department of Health and Human Services. And I know that had the bill would have continued on in the process, it would have made some pretty grievous changes to how people could be reimbursed if they found out that they were victims of SNAP fraud. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Serge. I think that was at the federal level. Is that right? Just making sure I'm understanding.
No, that's a state bill.
No, the state government.
Oh, okay. Ben?
Yeah, Serge, I don't have any inside knowledge on why that was withdrawn, but we're going to have that slide for withdrawn bills, and we'll make sure that that's included, just so I think that's an important inclusion on that list. But I don't have somebody else on this call I don't have any inside information as to why that was pulled.
Sounds good. They basically dodged a bullet.
Excellent. Okay. Thanks, Serge, for flagging that. I see Lisa has a hand up, and just in closing the loop, I think we can certainly reach out and see if there's any information we can gather for next week's meeting.
Yeah, I was just wondering if there are any updates on HB 42, Senate Bill 134 on the food reduction and diversion grants.
There are no official updates in the status of those bills, so they are still in committee, haven't made it out of the committee process yet.
Okay, thank you.
Is there anybody on the call that's been engaged with that bill that might have an update? Thanks, Lisa, for flagging it.
Heather, while I've obviously been following it and have testified on it, we don't have an update. It's my understanding that there's, because of the opposition from the solid waste disposal companies, I think committee members are reluctant to move it, particularly more so in the Senate than the House.
Yeah, thanks, Rachel. That makes sense. And Lisa, we can check in with the sponsors there just to see if there's any additional input beyond what Rachel has shared.
Thank you.
Other check-ins or updates? I appreciate the questions. All right. Well, it's well timed to have Ben's email address up there. So if there are other bills or updates that you would like to highlight or share or ask questions around, I think Ben is very generously offering to be the point of contact for that. And
I'll be reaching out to you, Ben, hopefully to make a presentation to our organization.
Oh, okay.
he is a star presenter. That is for sure.
I don't know about that, but I'd be happy to do it.
Franchise opportunities coming soon. So excellent. Well, Michelle, I think now that you are back with us, I would love for you to close out if you are open to that, unless there's updates from Annika or Ben.
Annika, Ben, anything else?
Uh-uh.
No,
Great.
thanks
Well,
everyone.
Yeah, thank you. Heather, we just added another minute by you transferring over to me. But no, it's great to see everyone, and we'll see you next week.
Take care, everybody.
Take care.
Thanks, everyone. Great to see you.
Thank you.